This episode of the Creep Street Podcast is brought to you by Martini Coffee Roasters. You know, people always look at me weird when I say I start off every morning with a big old martini. But then I set them straight, and I tell them I'm talking about Martini Coffee Roasters coffee. A delicious coffee made by the Martini family. They roast their coffee using a traditional method of sight and sound to roast those little babies to perfection. And they also sell green coffee beans for those home roasters out there. And right now, fans of the Creep Street Podcast can get 20% off their entire order by using the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Once again, for 20% off your order, use the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Martini Coffee Roasters, the perfect coffee to keep you creeps caffeinated.
You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
Oh, and you have arrived at Creep Street Central. It is New Year's Eve, baby.
Yeah, whoa.
New Year's Eve. Ooh.
Time to party.
And let us just start by saying, as we said at the end of the last episode, of course, thank you for making 2022 so amazing.
Yes.
2023, we are going to Mars, baby. We're going to space. We are launching big time, and I cannot wait to see what unfolds because it's the magic you guys bring to it. So thank you so much.
Yes, we hope you all had a fantastic year.
Yes.
And that you have a wonderful year ahead. And we're just excited. We're just excited to be doing it with you guys. To just be on this this crazy ride we call life.
Amen. Amen. And of course, today is special because we are doing Volume 5 of Listener Stories. God, do I love doing these.
No, me too. I really do love doing these too.
So let's just quickly get the opening stuff out of the way. You know, of course, like, rate, subscribe. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We also have a TikTok. On our Facebook, we have a forum, Citizens of the Milky Way, a Creep Street fan page where anyone can join. It's like a forum where daily we just interact with our listeners and all that stuff. And of course, we have a Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Creep Street Podcast for all sorts of goodies. But yeah, one of the listener stories is a Patreon subscriber, so that's great.
We love that.
So yeah, of course, go check that out. But you know what? Goodness gracious, this is so fun. I love doing these.
Oh,
and
my
I
gosh,
love
yes.
breaking them down. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
We've got some good ones today. Boy, oh boy, do we ever. Now, Maureen is going to kick it off for us. We have one from a longtime listener. She has been, I think, in at least 2 or 3 of the listener stories. Miss Anita Poligronos from Argentina. Always happy to hear from her. She's just so sweet. She's been following us for so long. We love her. We love hearing from her.
Yes, thank you so much. You are so welcome here. You are such a joy, and thank you for all that you do for the podcast.
Yes, thank you, Anita. Now, Momo, go ahead and dish. What is Anita up to now?
Okay, here we go. Hello, my fellow citizens. I had the coolest paranormal experience and I need to vent. I, female 38, have an 18-year-old son. He's graduating this year. In my country, it's tradition for graduating students to travel somewhere and party to celebrate. So I took my son and 3 of his female friends to my hometown at the beach for a week. We rented an apartment from one sweet lady that charged us almost nothing for the whole stay. We nailed it. The kids had a great time at the beach, water parks, and shopping. The whole thing started 3 days into our stay. On Wednesday, my son spent the night with some of his male friends that live in town, so we were all girls at the apartment. That night, while I was cooking, I saw a little, gnome vertical strip of light move from under the kitchen sink towards the door to the living room. 5 seconds later, one of the girls comes running and screaming in, saying that some little thing had ran past her in the hallway, but that she didn't want to scare her friends. Okay, so we both saw it, but we'll keep that quiet so the other girls don't get scared. Later that night, we were having dinner at the living room. The kitchen door was closed, and suddenly it opened and closed by itself. Please know it was a very old wooden door that you had to literally kick or shoulder bump in order to open it. We both played dumb, but almost instantly the electric kettle that was over the fridge activated by itself. and one of the other girls saw a shadow go across the kitchen. Of course, they freaked out, but me and the other girl felt funny. It felt like a mischievous kid that was trying to get attention. They all slept together that night, and the next day we went to the beach. The kettle kept activating by itself, so I unplugged it as it was a fire risk. When we came back from the beach, all the paintings on the wall were tilted to the right, as if someone had tilted the whole apartment. Creepy, but harmless. Next, clothes and items started disappearing and reappearing at odd places. On Thursday night, I had had enough, so I confronted it, and many would say that was a bad idea. But I placed a rosary and a picture of my grandpa at the window and asked him to protect us. I told the entity that it wasn't welcome and to leave, and everything calmed down for some time. That night, the mom of one of the girls that was with me came to town and stayed for the last 2 days of our trip. Friday morning comes around, and we had not said a word to this woman because she might think we were crazy or worse, get scared. But she came to me asking me, "Am I crazy? Last night something kept pulling my covers down and knocking at my wall." Well, I had to tell her the truth, and she asked for my rosary to put it under her pillow that last night we were going to stay there. Again, I didn't feel threatened in any way, just a naughty ghost that wanted attention.
Okay, very interesting. Now, I like that she points out she focused on the gnome-like
Yes,
side. Now,
yeah.
we did our gnome episode, obviously, in November. And then on our Patreon, we did an episode that it was a smattering of things, but a large portion of it focused on gnome sightings in South America. Apparently,
Yeah.
Central and South America are where gnome sightings are most common. Even though they're seen all around the world, they're most prevalent, apparently, in Central and South America.
Which is so interesting. Like, I was not expecting that at all when we kind of figured that out.
Well, it makes me wonder if there's different types, of like how when you play a game, like I know, and this is obviously fiction, but when you play a game like Elder Scrolls or something, when you're picking your class, there's different kinds of elves. There's like wood elves and high elves, and granted, we're talking about gnomes, not elves, but dark elves, and they come from different regions. Like in Iceland, they say the elves like to live near the lava rocks. Are there different types of gnomes?
I mean, I would think so. I think that would only make sense that there would be different types of gnomes. Like there are different types of everything.
Exactly. Yeah, I just find that so fascinating, but she still referred to it as a ghost. She thinks it sounds like it was more of a ghost. Now, we know that we've read that gnomes, at least in our episode, can sometimes turn invisible and stuff, but it also lends itself to what we talk about all the time, how a lot of these things might bleed together.
Yeah.
Like maybe this is a ghost-like spirit that is maybe not a gnome, but it's like this little, what do they call it? A trickster. It's maybe not there to cause harm, it's just there to have fun.
Right, cause a little mischief and yeah.
Exactly. And I'm so glad that it was of that nature, because Anita, in a lot of the other stories she's given us, there was scary shit. Hat Man sightings, like sleep paralysis. I hope she's feeling better. I would think that if she had other bad episodes, she probably would have told us. So I'm glad to hear that it seems like when these things happen in her life, they're becoming more harmless and maybe even a little benevolent in some ways. So
yeah, we hope.
That's good. Yeah. And great idea, not just the rosary, but using the photo of your grandpa. That's something you don't think of, is using the love you have, could take not just your love for a higher power, but the love you have for others, and use that as a tool, as a weapon to fight, as a shield.
Right, because we think of these things as scaring us or causing fear for whatever reason that it may be, but it's possible because fear is such a strong emotion. It's such a strong visceral feeling.
Absolutely.
That you need another really strong feeling to go along with it for it to fight against.
Absolutely.
So having love for someone that you really, really love, like a grandparent, is something that actually can go up against the level of fear that you may feel.
Right. And it sounds cheesy to say love, but maybe even what we think of as love and hate, our feelings, maybe we don't even fully understand them. Maybe they can be used in ways to affect things around us.
Yeah.
Like maybe love, because if you remember in the movie Interstellar, he talks about, I can't remember, it's been a while since I've seen it, but how love is something that remained constant no matter where they were in time. Like maybe these things we give off are actually do affect the universe. And I know that sounds cheesy and
no,
like, but maybe this
yeah.
is, maybe those are tools that we can use, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
Incredible story. Thank you, Anita. Glad to know you're doing well.
Yes, thank you so much, and congratulations to your son for
Yes.
for graduating.
What an accomplishment. Awesome. Hope you guys are having a blast. That is so wonderful. Next up,
All right, what's next?
we got one from a newer listener. She introduced herself a month or two back. Very happy to have her as part of the Creep Street community.
Yes, welcome. We are so happy to have you.
Her name is Zorita Gonzalez, and let's dive in.
Let's do it.
Hello, greetings from Southeast Texas. I'm a fan of the podcast and also, of course, true crime and anything in between with conspiracy theories and the occult. I am Mexican-American and always grew up hearing stories of La Llorona. I was always skeptical of this folklore until I was 15. This was several years ago, back in the mid-2000s. I was a troubled girl that ran away from home to escape the physical and mental abuse of my mom. I won't go into many details about the how and why, but I actually ended up in Mexico, Puebla, Mexico to be exact. It was there one night I woke up from my sleep to the awful gut-wrenching wails and cries of a woman in pain. It made me freeze and pull the covers up, and I was paralyzed by the sound. I remember she was sobbing and crying and sounded like the wind would carry her cries. One minute it sounded like she was outside the house's door, and then she sounded far away. The next morning I asked the lady whose house I was staying in, Donna Felix, if she heard her and if it was La Llorona. I was in shock when she explained that neighbors have claimed to frequently hear her or even see her, and that yes, it was her, and not just a made-up story Mexican women would tell their children. I've heard also that when she sounds far away, she's closer than you think. I will never forget that experience because after hearing her, I am a believer that things we can't explain happen, and I didn't have to see her to know it was real. I was so fascinated that several local townspeople would tell their own version of the story. Some said she has a horse's head and face. What struck me as odd was the house I was staying in was on the opposite end of town where a river ran through La Poza. I heard her on another occasion, and I honestly think the reason why I heard her was either because my dad died while I was a runaway or because I ran away from home during that time. I'm 32 years old, and in the years since upon returning back to the States, I've searched online for similar stories or anybody who has had an experience with her. Today at work, whilst listening to the podcast, I clicked on the La Llorona episode and listened to it. It really got me thinking of, for some reason, those mothers who drowned their kids, like Susan Smith. In my mind, I would like to think it was my mom channeling through her to cry out so I can hear it. Don't know why, but that's just what I feel in my bones, and I'm a firm believer to trust my gut. Anyone else out there have an experience? I would love to hear from you. Side note, it's interesting that there's variations to her story in different countries that speak Spanish and sightings, even in Texas. Wow.
Very
Now,
scary.
Zorita, hopefully I'm saying that name right. I think I am, Zorita. If I'm not, I sincerely apologize. First of all, thank you for sharing that story, especially one so deeply personal about, your childhood. You had, your rough upbringing, and obviously that we are so sorry to hear that, and hopefully that is long behind you. Yeah, what an interesting encounter, and how the whole neighborhood was like, oh yeah.
Right. Like, that's just something that, like, everyone kind of accepted.
Absolutely. Wow.
Yeah, and, if you're interested in these kinds of stories, feel free to check out our La Llorona episode that we did a while back. And thank you for giving us a shout out in your personal story to that episode. We appreciate it, of course. But yeah, that story and that folklore, or whatever you want to call it, surrounding La Llorona is really fascinating. And it is wild that it's like there are these things that are unexplainable and that people have just come to accept.
Absolutely. And it's funny how she mentioned that before her experience, she just figured it was just one of those stories that mothers tell their children. And we've said it before, it's amazing how many scary fairy tales and things came out of parents just trying to get their kids to behave. Like we talked about that with Mateo when we did the episode with him.
That was our Aswang episode.
Aswang, yeah, talking about the Aswang in the Philippines, like how much scary shit was created just to frighten fucking children. Mm-hmm. Like what an amazing, like it's so, and it's just been this thing throughout time that's just how people, it was a way of just corralling your children, but then to actually confront it.
Right, where it's like, it's kind of like what came first, the chicken or the egg kind of thing, where it's like, was there already something like this, and we just, like humans, just gave it a name? Right,
or was it a thought form, a tulpa, like did the collective belief in this thing when you believe, especially something that's scary and that's threatening, because we've joked like, how come Santa's not real if so many people believe it? Well, because maybe there's not as many stakes. If Santa's not real, he's not real. But like, if La Llorona's real, that could fuck your day up.
Yeah.
That could wreck your damn day. Like, so you almost believe more in the things that could hurt you.
Right.
For obvious reasons. Mm-hmm. And maybe that brings some of these things to life.
Yeah.
But also maybe it did. Yeah, that's a terrifying story. And some of the things online that people have captured claiming to be like her cries, just terrifying. Like the sound of it is just awful.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that incredible story. We so appreciate it. All right, here is our next story from the lovely Kat.
Yes, this comes from Kat, Instagram user who's reached out to us before. Very cool person. She works in a university library, and they have a lot of rare books, like on demonology and stuff. She's sent us photos and stuff. Super cool stuff. So glad to have her as a listener.
Yes, so glad. Thank you so much. We so appreciate it. And thank you for being you.
You never know when we might have to reach out to her for a source.
Big time.
Absolutely, because we'll do it, Kat. If there's something we need, we might reach out to you. So happy to have you as a listener and cannot wait to share your story.
So although I'm on the superstitious side, I would say I pretty intentionally closed myself off from experiencing anything paranormal. I'd never had any extremely strange experiences growing up, but last year in October, there was an incident at work. I work at a special collections library, if you had seen my previous messages about rare books, and there are some very disturbing things, such as real autopsy reports and photos, many occult books and journals, so much more. The point is, I had only just started working here. I was in a room that's separate from the rest of the library called East Storage. There's only one way to get into this room, and you need a key card to get in. For temperature control reasons, there are 2 very large industrial fans blowing. However, this means that once you're inside the room, you can't hear anything going on outside, or even if someone in the room was walking around. It's also soundproof from the outside. The books act as soundproofing to the point where you can barely hear someone talking if they're just a couple aisles away. There are no windows, and the lights are motion activated. I was reorganizing the Edgar Allan Poe section, which has some witchcraft and satanic books in it, because it's really just a collection of books that reference Poe as well. And I had been in this room by myself for hours now. The only light in the room was in the aisle I was in, and every 15 minutes or so, I would have to get down from my stool and walk around waving my arms to activate the lights again. I really like this room. It has a particular feeling to it, but my point is that I wasn't paranoid or scared in this moment. I was listening to The Shining on Audible for the first time and dealing with books on the very top shelf. The narrator got to the part where the ghost, Tony, talks to Danny and says, "Danny, Danny, Danny," in a sing-song voice. The moment this happened, a piece of paper all the way down the aisle, I'm talking like 25-30 feet away from me, truly flies off the shelf as if it was yanked. My head snapped to look over, and the lights went out above my head despite I had just reactivated them. This all happened within truly a second, and what's even stranger is that the audiobook paused on my phone, and it was sitting a few feet away from me. My heart skipped a beat or two when this happened, but I laughed it off and got down. I told the curator about this funny experience, and his face went completely white and asked why I would do that. I was a bit taken aback, asked what he meant by that, and he said, "East is haunted. I wouldn't be doing things to encourage anything like that in there." At the end of the day, when we set the motion sensor alarms in the rooms, East has gone off multiple times. Every time I've checked, no one has ever been in there. The next time I opened the door to East storage, there was a light on in the middle of the room. Again, since these are timed and motion sensor, if someone had just come into the room and left, the last light that would be on would be the one closest to the door, since it would have been the last one activated, unless someone was in the aisle, of course. I immediately walked into the room, looking down each aisle, using my phone flashlight, I might add, because the lights wouldn't activate strangely, and no one was there. When I got to the aisle with the light on, it was the same aisle that I had been in when this happened. I mean, what a scary thing to happen. You're in this room, no one can hear you from the outside, you can't really even hear that well from the inside, you're like in a vacuum almost. And I wonder, is there some kind of message that someone's trying to get across, or is it just something is trying to scare who's ever in there? Maybe it's just a residual haunting, or, I don't know.
Right.
But whatever it is, that would freak me out so bad.
It almost sounds like an old librarian, like it was turning off the thing saying, "Be quiet" or something.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't know, but that is scary. And what a cool job.
A very cool job. Wow.
Yeah, we love that.
Kat, we will definitely reach out if we need some deep sources.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for sending that story along, and, we appreciate you.
Absolutely. All right, now we've got one from our newest Patreon subscriber.
Ooh.
This one comes from the witchy wonder JP Weimer.
Whoa.
I'm ready to dive into this one. This one's a little lengthy.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, JP. We are so grateful to have you, and thank you for sending along this story.
Absolutely. All right. Here we go. My personal and family experience is very steeped in the paranormal, so where to begin is no easy task. I suppose I'll start with some truly frightening experiences with the Hat Man that truly shaped my belief in the otherworldly. Though not my first brush with the paranormal, in early childhood I had some experiences, though I actually do not remember them too well. They are more family experiences involving myself. But the encounters involving the Hat Man were undoubtedly the most frightening, and to this day, still hard to believe. Please take into consideration that I was born in 1981, and when I had these encounters around 8 or 9 years of age, this was pre-internet, and the Hat Man was a phenomenon not widely known, at least not to my knowledge. So around the aforementioned age of 8 or 9, what I refer to as the heyday of the haunting in my home really began. And it was ushered in one night with an encounter that I'll never forget, as I lay awake in bed trying to fall asleep. At this time, my bed faced my bedroom doorway, looking into a small hallway that also led into the home's only bathroom, which was directly across from my bedroom. It was probably between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. that as I lay wide awake trying to fall asleep, that I became aware of a figure standing in the hallway outside of my bedroom. My initial thought was burglar, yet this wasn't correct. First, the figure standing in the hallway was blacker than the black surrounding it. No lights were on, and I could barely see the hand in front of my face, yet I could clearly distinguish that a figure was standing in the hallway. Second, they stood in profile and seemed to be wearing a trench coat with the collar turned up in a fedora. My first thought was of those neighborhood watch signs seen so frequently in my neighborhood as a child, or a profile of a Dick Tracy comic come to life. Eerily enough, I also could see that the profile of this figure was off. By that I mean there were no curves to the outline of its face. Everything was at a right angle, giving it an unnatural appearance. Its nose was pointy, its chin, its brow bone, almost like a construction paper cutout rendered in black of what a child might think a detective may look like, although far more sinister than I could describe here. It stood in profile, seemingly looking off to the right, yet I could feel that its gaze was fixed sharply and cruelly on me. Further, I could see no features such as a mouth or eyes, and no, it did not have red eyes as I've heard in the experiences of others who have encountered this being. It was solid black, a tall, right-angled, menacing black mass that was looking at me without looking at me, as crazy as that sounds. As I stared at this thing, my heart started to pound wildly out of control and adrenaline flooded my body. I'm not sure how much time passed, maybe just 2 minutes at most, but it seemed to be several. And something that I'll never forget, the more afraid I became as I beheld it, the darker and taller it itself became. Its darkness became even more pronounced, and its height now almost reaching the top of the ceiling in the hallway. Also, I don't know how I knew this, but I could sense that it delighted in my fear. I can't tell you what an awful thought it is to wonder if you can die of a heart attack at 8 or 9 years old, but I clearly remember thinking that. That's how out of control my heartbeat became as I stared at this figure. With my fight or flight instinct kicking in, I launched myself out of bed and ran into the hallway, head down, and through this figure, and into my mom's room, which was immediately off of the left of mine. I crouched by her and turned to look into the hallway, but the figure had gone. I sat by her bed for some time and eventually ventured back into my own room, again knowing without knowing how that it had left. I have to pause here between the other encounters to share a fact that was confirmed later as a teenager. My mother was a tortured individual, suffering from both mental illness and addiction issues. During my childhood and into my teenage years, I knew that she was into the New Age scene, but only during my teen years did I fully realize that she was also into darker areas of the occult. Long story short, I came to discover that she dabbled into matters she should have best left alone, and I believe her experiences helped to invite this Hat Man into our lives, as well as a majority of the rest of the haunting phenomenon. My second encounter with a Hat Man type figure remains a strange one indeed. With the advent of the internet, I came to hear of encounters that were fairly similar to my first one, yet the second one I had is one that I never heard mirrored. One evening, close to sunset, I was playing with pound puppies. Anyone recall those? On our living room couch, when out of the corner of my eye, I saw a marble side table that my mother had, which held a Tiffany lamp, start to slowly move so that it started to tilt back and forth. As I watched this table move by itself in amazement, I was powerless to move, to stop it from falling over completely. The lamp, of course, shattering as it hit the floor. Similarly, hitting the floor, my mother came screaming out of her bedroom, asking me what just happened. Scared of her wrath, I bolted upstairs to my oldest sister's room. Now this house is a Cape Cod, and the upstairs is one large area, so as I ran upstairs and jumped into her bed next to her as she napped, I could clearly see across the room and the landing leading to the staircase which led downstairs. Now you have to understand that my oldest sister raised me. There's an age gap of 17 years between us, and I always found comfort in her presence, especially during our mother's frequent rampages. On this occasion, fearing what I thought to be an inevitable beating that would come from my mother, who believed that I tipped her table over, as I sat in bed next to my sister with my eyes fixed on the landing, I saw just slightly off to my right a flickering shadow. Next to a rocking chair that my sister had at the end of the bed was a Hat Man figure standing with one arm on the arm of the rocking chair. However, this one was far different in size from the other. This one was almost a compressed version of the first. It was perhaps 3 feet tall at most and very squat in shape. Again, as if the tall figure had been compressed down in size. Like the first figure, though, this one stood before me in profile, this time looking off to the left as opposed to the right. Also, the familiar features were there, the face being all right angles, the fedora, the trench coat with the collar turned up, and the solid blacker-than-black opaqueness to it that lacked any features within it. However, unlike its taller counterpart, the outline of this figure was flickering. It very much reminded me of how a candle will cast flickering shapes of objects onto walls or ceilings. Additionally, and I don't know how I knew this, but this one was an entirely different being than the first one I had seen just a week or so prior. This one was also more coolly detached in how it presented itself, and almost seemed to be studying me, differing from the first one who seemed to exist solely to terrify me. Of course, seeing yet another being of this kind in my home, terror flooded through me, and I grabbed my sister's shoulder and started to shake her awake. Keep in mind, she had not yet registered that anything was going on around her. As I shook her, shouting that there's a ghost in the room, she blankly turned over, sat up, and stared at the miniature hat man. Again, I emphatically shouted that there was a ghost and asked if she saw it, but I could see that she was almost in a trance, staring ahead without seeing anything. In complete disbelief that compounded my fear, I glanced from her to the small hat man who, by this time, had his entire outline shimmering and flickering violently. As I witnessed this, he just slowly faded into himself and disappeared. Think when you rub your eyes vigorously for a minute, then open them again. It sometimes takes the room a moment to come back from blackness into focus. Think of that with this encounter, but in reverse. This being was there, then slowly just faded in front of me. I immediately turned focus back to my sister, who, as she was still staring blankly straight ahead, slowly lowered herself down on her back as if she was almost a puppet being lowered by its strings, turned on her side to face the wall, and resumed sleeping. To this day, she has no memory of this, and only later did I come to hear of a phenomenon known as psychic sleep, and I'm convinced that this small hat man was flickering so much because it was expending energy to keep my sister unconscious for some reason. After that encounter, I never again saw the hat man in any form. However, 2 boyfriends that my mother had during this time of my life saw the tall figure that I initially saw. Her first boyfriend in question saw the hat man one night in the living room of our home, and being justifiably terrified, ran out of the house invoking the name of God at the top of his lungs. Now it should be known that my mother met him through her father, my grandfather. My maternal grandfather was well-to-do and owned a number of properties, my mother's boyfriend being the caretaker of several, and in fact living in an apartment above a store that my grandfather owned. The very next morning after this encounter, my grandfather called to tell us all, to our great shock, that my mother's boyfriend died in a fire later that very night that he fled the house, apparently after having fallen asleep with some candles burning, which caused the destruction of his apartment and his death. As crazy as it sounds, we believe that this figure had something to do with it. Finally, my mother's boyfriend, after the one who perished, also saw the hat man. As the story goes, according to my mother, her boyfriend and my sister, who was home and upstairs in her room, one evening as my mother was in the kitchen sink doing dishes with her boyfriend standing behind her with his arms wrapped around her waist, the tall hat man came out of the wall in the kitchen and rushed up on my mother and her boyfriend, with her boyfriend apparently feeling as if arms were pulling him off my mother. Hearing a commotion downstairs, my sister came down from her room and upon reaching the bottom of the stairs saw my mother's boyfriend run screaming out of the house, taking off down the street wearing only a pair of jeans. For the duration of their relationship, which lasted for quite some time after this encounter, he refused to ever enter our house again. So there you have it. These experiences with these beings kicked off the violent haunting in my home. What stands out to me is not only the unique nature of having seen 2 variations of the Hat Man, but the fact that multiple others saw at least one of its forms as well. Again, keep in mind that this was in the late 80s, early 90s, so we figured we were alone in such encounters. Only later, with the prevalence of the internet, did we realize that this is all more common than we'd like to think. Wow.
That is scary
Now,
stuff.
that's scary stuff. Now, the fact that her mother's boyfriend died, wow.
What the fuck?
Well, and when you consider the troubles that their mother had,
Absolutely.
and how that kind of relates to Zarita's story, like there's this kind of a theme
yeah.
that's popped up with like mothers that have had issues with violence and drug abuse, and fascinating that her mother had kind of dabbled in the occult, and if that had something to do with it. Very fascinating. And also, God, the boyfriend dying.
Oh my
Horrifying.
God. That's crazy.
Horrifying.
First of all, everyone just be careful with your candles. I love a good candle more than anyone, but you gotta be careful. Be careful with your candles.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's fascinating hearing these stories about the Hat Man from, like what JP was saying, from pre-internet.
And how it looked like it was a cutout almost. Jagged, pointed features, almost like, because I can remember, you don't see them as much anymore, but those neighborhood watch signs, and they got like the old school, and they're right, they're right. It does look like a Dick Tracy outline. It's
Yes.
like the old like noir, collar of a trench coat flipped up, a fedora hat. It does look like an old type, like what you think of a 1940s like private investigator. That is interesting, and how it was almost like it was 2D, like it was flat. And then how the one like flickered, now flickering.
Yeah.
Even though JP didn't mention static, that's something we hear almost like flickering, like it's a signal.
Yes.
Which makes you also wonder, is this thing it's like cutting through space-time, it's cutting through the dimension of this reality to broadcast something. Very interesting that first encounter, it was like it was getting a snack.
Yes.
It was snacking on the fear, whereas the second one, the smaller one.
Yeah, interesting hearing about this like shorter, squatter being thing.
Which kind of ties into Anita's at the very beginning, this short gnome-like light. Now this one sounds different. This sounds more like a light rather than a darkness, but it was tiny.
And the flickering.
The flickering, so fascinating.
It's using its energy, like possibly to keep, JP's sister asleep or whatever. So interesting. And these things we know now are so prevalent and people have heard of them so much that it's like, we want to know so much more about these things.
Absolutely.
And I think just brushing them off as some misfiring of the brain or kind of just like something that happens during sleep paralysis, I think is really oversimplifying it, because so many people have seen these things in different times, like with JP's mom and boyfriend when they were doing the dishes. They weren't asleep or they weren't previously sleeping or anything like that, and they saw something just pop out of the wall.
Right.
And that's multiple people seeing something. It's like, what was that then?
Yeah, like that. Wow. Now, I hope, this is obviously years later, I hope that things have gotten better. I hope that JP's mother is well and everything. Mm-hmm. Very mother-focused in this episode.
Yes.
Very fascinating. And that the La Llorona aspect of it. Very fascinating how I love it when this happens. Every time we do one of these listener stories, we see little sparks of things that connect.
Yeah.
Even if it's just us making those connections, even if it, like how it has to do with mothers, like maybe that has nothing to do with it, but just how this was kind of a mother themed.
Yeah.
Anita was celebrating her son's graduation, a mother and son. Like this was a very mother focused collection of stories I thought was interesting.
And even, even with Kat's story, that one didn't really necessarily have to do with mothers, of course, but it really had to do with like these energies of things in places where they don't belong.
Right, absolutely.
And how we kind of deal with that and what that means and how scary that can be. And so what a wild collection of stories. And thank you all so much for sending them over. And please continue to send them over. We're going to do this again in the summertime.
Even if it's not the time we do, just keep sending them. Just keep sending them. We collect them. And of course, if there's anything we missed, if there's one you sent and we missed it, we're so sorry. Let us know. We will rectify that.
Yes, big time.
Wonderful collection of stories. Thank you for sharing these very intimate, personal stories. Thank you for feeling safe enough to, and comfortable enough with us as hosts to share that. We're very honored and humbled by that. So thank you. And we hope we do these stories justice and give them the proper respect that they deserve. And let me read off the list of our top-tier Patreon subscribers. Of course, the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish Face Via Lungfist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Vivacious Vicky McHugh, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the oh-so-suave Sean Richardson, the British Bonebreaker Bex Martin, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the Sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the Loathsome Johnny Love, the Carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the Killer Stud Carl Staub, the Firestarter Heather Carter, the Conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the Awfully Awesome Annie, the Murderous Maggie Leach, the Sir of Sexy Sam Hackworth, the Evil Elizabeth Riley, Lauren Hellfire Hernandez Lopez, the Maniacal Laura Maynard, the Vicious Karen Van Buren, the Arch Nemesis Aaron Bird, the Sadistic Sergio Castillo, the Rapscallion Ryan Crum, the Beast Benjamin Huang, the Devilish Chris Doucette, the Psycho Sam, the Electric Emily Zhang, the Ghoulish Gerd Hankum, the Renegade Corey Ramos, the Crazed Carlos, the Antagonist Andrew Park, the Monstrous Michaela Schur, and the Witchy Wonder JP Weimer.
Whoa. Thank you so much to all of our Patreon subscribers. A special shout out for our top tier. We couldn't do this without you. We are so grateful for you. And thank you all again for listening to us. And we hope you have a safe and happy 2023.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
Good night and goodbye.
Goodbye.